Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Please excuse us having a couple of teething issues. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. Awesome. So really pleased to have you all along. This is the first webinar in a series that we're holding that is going to explain to you in a little bit more detail how to use some of the adapters for our latest feature, bidirectional contract testing. My name is Alicia Foreman. I'm the product marketing manager at Pactflow, and I'm here with my two colleagues who I'll introduce to you shortly, and they will be explaining to you, they'll be talking to you about today's topic. Just a couple of notes just on the event. Firstly, we really appreciate you taking some time out of your day, no matter what time it is, to come and listen in. If you have any questions throughout the experience, please do pop them in the Q&A option that we've got. Sorry, just pop them in the chat for us and we will answer those. And let's kick off. Matt, do you want to run through to the agenda slide? Awesome. So just quick intros. I've just introduced myself. Got also Matt Fellows here. He's a co-founder of Pactflow and also one of our newest team members, Yusuf Nabi. He's our developer advocate here at Pactflow.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
Quick run through of the agenda. As I said, we'll be touching on, explaining to you what bidirectional contract testing is. We're going to then explain, Matt's going to explain to you how it works. Then we're going to run through a demo. Yusuf is going to run through that demo for us today. We'll have a quick summary and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So Matt, I'll hand it over to you to kick off.
Thank you, Alicia. Great to see so many faces here, a bunch of names I recognize from the forum. So yeah, thanks for coming along. Hopefully you can get something out of this. Just for those who don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders here at Pactflow. I'm one of the maintainers of Pact, particularly get involved with Pact.js and Pact Go, as well as some of the core and just generally around the community. My background is in consulting. I'm a recovering consultant. Particularly in APIs, microservices, DevOps, and cloud. That was kind of where I spent most of my time, and got involved with Pact about seven years ago, and haven't looked back. So today we're going to start by talking about bidirectional contract testing. Hopefully you guys can all see my screen correctly, and hopefully you can't see my presenter notes. If they're in the way, let me know. So bidirectional contract testing is a new form of contract testing that we've created at Pactflow to complement our support for the consumer-driven approach with Pact. Probably many of you are familiar with Pact. The way bidirectional contract testing works is it's a type of static contract testing where we compare two contracts. One is going to represent the consumer side, the expectations, and one is going to represent the provider's capability, as in what the provider can do. And those two contracts get compared to ensure that they remain compatible. The way it basically works is teams will generate a consumer contract from their own mocking tools. So they can still use Pact if you want, or you can use WireMock, and what we'll do today is show you that with Cypress. And on the provider side, you verify a provider contract, such as an open API specification, and you're going to use your own functional tools, such as Postman, to verify it. And then, as I said, Pactflow will statically compare those two contracts down to the field level to make sure that they stay compatible. So basically, in short, you can rapidly upgrade your existing tools and processes, into a contract testing solution. And really that should improve your ROI for your contract testing initiatives, because you can use those things you've already got. So just very quickly, in contrasting this to Pact, Pact is more of a record and replay style. So with Pact, you're going to write a set of tests that you're going to maintain that are separate to your other tests. And they're going to make sure your system is compatible. And so on the consumer side, obviously, this is going to be a series of scenarios that test the various API integrations that you need from that consumer for a given provider. And then later on, we're going to replay all those examples again against a running provider to make sure it works. And obviously, if the provider responds correctly, then the contract is valid. So there are slightly different approaches to achieve similar things. We'll talk about some of those trade-offs a little bit later as well. One final comment here is that bidirectional contract testing, this particular feature, is exclusive to Pactflow. It's not available in the open source software. Okay. So what are some of the outcomes you can expect by using this style? Why build something different is probably a better way of asking this, or a different way of asking this. The first one is we believe it's a lower barrier to entry. So I should say we love Pact. Pact is great. We don't want to get rid of Pact. It's not about that. It's about providing some different options. But we should recognize that Pact is complex and does have its challenges in terms of upskilling, and occasionally can require you to transfer your ways of working. And that can be a barrier to adopting contract testing. So this different approach can reduce that barrier, and therefore it makes it a bit more accessible. The second thing is, because you get to reuse your existing tests and tools and processes that you already have, in theory, that should mean you can more rapidly increase coverage across more systems, scale contract testing across teams. The third one is we've expanded the set of roles that we have here. So with Pact, it's much more accessible to developers in the sense that you do need access to the code to be able to write the Pact tests. It doesn't mean you can't influence around that, but if you don't have access to the code, it's very difficult to write Pact tests. With bidirectional contracts, you can do this in a white box or a black box style, which just means you've got more people who can get involved, in the testing process. And we like to think of it as creating a bridge to, changing some of those ways of working as well. And lastly, as we talked about, because you can reuse those tools and practices you've already invested in, you're going to improve your ROI. You're going to be able to get to doing contract testing faster. You're going to reuse existing tools, reduce some duplication, and so on. So let's talk a bit about how it actually works, because it's all theory by now, right? So let's look at a bit of a diagram that kind of explains, how this would work. So the first thing to note actually is with bidirectional contract testing, you can do it. You can initiate this whole thing from either side. So with Pact, for example, it's always going to be consumer driven. That's just the way Pact works. But with bidirectional contract testing, you can actually initiate it from the consumer or the provider side. And one of the main use cases is for design first or spec first development. So in this diagram, I'm going to show you it from that perspective. So let's say we've got an open API specification, whether you've written that by hand or that's been auto-generated from code. What we're going to do is we're going to bring our own provider testing tool, such as Postman, and we're going to make sure that our code base, our provider code base, is compatible with that specification. We call that verifying a provider contract. And because we've already got a provider contract, we've now got that side done. On the consumer side, it's very similar to Pact. You can still use Pact. In fact, we're going to write a set of consumer tests, unit testing or testing our consumer against a mock of the provider. So you can use Pact for that, which is, I guess, a white box unit testing tool, or you can use tools like Cypress or fully black box style test. The main thing is that you can take those mocks and serialize them into a Pact file. And now we have a consumer contract. The consumer contract says, this is what my consumer needs of this provider to operate. The provider contract says, this is what I can do. It just advertises its full capabilities. Now, in each of their pipelines, respectively, those contracts get published up to Pactflow, very similar to what you would do with Pact. And then what Pactflow does is we're going to ensure that the consumer contract is a valid subset of the provider contract down to the field level. And if the consumer adds something that the provider can't do, this will obviously fail. And if the provider changes itself, removes a property, changes the name, what have you, in such a way that makes it incompatible with its consumers, it's going to fail as well. So just recapping those steps in a little bit more detail, because I kind of showed you the process overall there. It's worth mentioning, we don't do it all at once. Similar to Pact, the consumer pipeline is its own pipeline, the provider pipeline is its own pipeline. So the consumer side is fairly simple. There's about 4 or 5 steps in each side that we're going to run through. We're going to write our test. We're going to test our consumer behavior against the mock. In the example today, Yusuf's going to show you using Cypress. The consumer contract then gets generated in the form of a Pact file, which captures those interactions that the consumer actually uses, just like Pact. The consumer contract then gets uploaded to Pactflow. And then throughout the pipeline, we can call can I deploy to check if this piece of software, this consumer, is compatible with its providers in a target environment, for example, production. And then of course we would deploy the consumer, and then we tell Pactflow that we've done that deployment. And that's the general steps we're going to follow here. Similarly, on the provider side, it's going to look quite similar. The provider starts with a spec or its provider contract, in this case, an open API. And we're going to, it can be generated by hand or generated by code. We don't really mind. If it's generated by code, you probably don't need to do any testing. We can talk about this later. Whereas if you generate it by hand, you need to bring your own tool to make sure the integrity of that file is sound and it does represent what the provider can actually do. Step 2, as we talked about, we're going to test that. Then we're going to upload that contract to Pactflow. We're going to run can I deploy to check its compatibility with its consumers. So the reverse of the consumer side. And then, of course, we're just going to deploy the provider and tell Pactflow we've done that. And that's the general process. So from here, I'm going to hand over to Yusuf, who will take us through a bit of a demonstration of this in action.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I will need to share my screen.
Yep.
So I have a tendency to be sharing the wrong screen when I'm talking about something. So if what I'm talking about doesn't necessarily relate to what's on the screen, just stop me, or if you can't see anything. So hopefully you guys should see an example demos page on our Pactflow website. So we've curated a load of examples. Just let me find the chat box. So we've got a set of curated examples in several different technologies, both demonstrating our consumer-driven contract flow and our bidirectional contract testing flow. In particular, we're going to look at 2 examples, Postman and Cypress, to show alternative ways of performing contract testing using the Pactflow framework. So traditionally, the consumer-driven contract testing flow would start with a consumer. However, in this demonstration, to show off the bidirectional capabilities, we're going to start with a provider-driven workflow, provider-first workflow. So we're going to use our Postman example, and I and you as well can take a fork of this repository, and we've taken one that we've prepared earlier. Just need to move this window. So in this particular repository, we have a provider API that's written in Express.js. We'll just open up our code editor. We can see we have an Express server here that's listed on port 3001. We have a set of routes that are being exposed, that are being mapped to controllers. We can see our controllers here with our 2 methods that are being exposed. So a getAll method to return all our products, or a getById. And we have a product repository that contains these products. So in this particular project, there are no traditional unit tests. So we might be representing, say, a legacy system that you are kind of testing from the outside. So to run alongside this repository, we hold a Postman collection. So we can see our Postman, we've got an environments collection here and a Postman's collection. And I will just open up our Postman app. We can see our Postman app is running here. And if we just look back at our code editor, we should have our Postman provider, our Express.js provider started on port 3001. So we're just going to run some Postman tests, and they're going to run against our real provider. So if we stop our provider and we run those tests again, we'll see that those tests fail, and those tests are failing because our provider isn't running. So in this particular example, when we run our Postman, we've created a Postman collection, and in our Postman collection has tests. So each of these endpoints, for those of you who are familiar with the Postman the Postman UI, you have your request kind of path and method at the top, but we can also add in the ability to create test assertions for our requests. So these are really useful for building up a set of smoke tests or integration tests. So here we have a set of integration tests that have been written with Postman. We can use, because we're big fans at Pact and Pactflow of open source tools, we can use an open source tool here called Postman to Open API, which will generate an open API spec from our Postman collection. So here we can see a Swagger file that has been generated from the Postman collection. Sorry, let me start again. So we have the Postman collection, and using our tool Postman to Open API, we can convert that into an open API spec. We can then use our Postman, but Postman's CLI counterpart, excuse me, which is Newman, which will allow us to run tests against the those same tests that we just ran in the Postman GUI. We're able to run them either from our local machine or in CI via a Newman CLI command runner. What we'll show in our repository here. So we've got our repository in GitHub. We've taken a fork from the main Pactflow example, and I've logged into I've created an account on the Pactflow platform, and I can see my Pactflow platform here has the host name YOU54F. That's my GitHub ID as well. So in our actions, just one other thing to mention: when we fork the repo, our guide will advise you to update your Pact broker base URL to that of your Pactflow account. In Pactflow as well, we will also go to our API tokens page. You'll be able to copy your read-write token. We will add our read-write token into our repository settings. So we can see that GitHub allows us to safely store secrets in against our GitHub actions, so that we can store our secret from Pactflow and have authentication to run our build. So what we'll do is we'll run our pipeline. We'll just trigger this build pipeline, and we'll quickly just show a diagram. So at this point in time, we're going to run a CI pipeline. This CI pipeline is going to spin up our provider, is going to take our Postman collection, and is going to run that Postman collection against our provider. It will generate test evidence from that Postman collection, and will upload both the Swagger, the Open API, and the Postman testing evidence to the Pactflow platform. So this has all been designed to also run locally from your machine and connect to the Pactflow platform with a few steps. But I thought it'd be nice to show us via GitHub Actions. So at this point, the test is completed. We'll just scroll down to our window. So we used our test converter, which converted our Postman collection into an OAS script. We ran Newman, where we passed in our environment JSON. I'll just make this slightly bigger. We pass in our environment JSON file in our Postman collection. We then we run that test, and that test passes. And then we upload, and we can just see our base64 encoded Swagger being uploaded to the Pactflow platform. So if we take a look at our Pactflow, we should be able to see our provider first, contract being uploaded to the platform. So here we can see we have our example provider, but because this is a provider first workflow, we have no consumer at this moment in time. If we look at our Pactflow contract for our provider, we can see that our contract type is Open API Swagger. We're hoping to expand this to further contract types in the future. We can look at our verification test result that was provided. So here it is a Postman test runner results, but it could easily be Dread or Rest Assured or whichever tool. One thing to note is we are asking the provider team to be sensible in the evidence that they provide. So we're not enforcing at the moment the particular test evidence that you provide. So if, for example, you only have an Open API Swagger and you're not at the point of testing it, or you don't have a developed service, you could still upload your contract to the platform. So we can also see that our Swagger is nicely rendered here. So whilst now that we've got our provider first pipeline in, it's tested and has been uploaded to the Pactflow platform, we're able to run one of the great features of both Pact and Pactflow, which is the ability to ask at the point of deployment, is it safe to deploy this provider? So this provider is actually safe to deploy because there are no consumers registered. So at that point, we then deploy this provider to production and we record the deployment of that this particular version of the software to production. So here we can see that our branch of master is deployed to production. If we do the same on our Cypress side, we'll just trigger this workflow and I'll take you through in detail what we're doing on the Cypress side. Bear me one moment. So some of you familiar with Cypress. In this particular example, we have a React app. It's a product consumer, and our product consumer will call off when the homepage loads. It will call a API client, which will request the products from our product API provider. Traditionally, we would have unit tests and component integration tests. And in our component integration tests, we would use our consumer-driven contract tools such as Pact to write, to mock out our provider and serialize those contracts and upload them to the Pactflow platform. In this particular scenario, we are going to generate our tests with Cypress and a adapter, a bring your own tool adapter that has been generated, that has been produced by the Pactflow team to take your Cypress mocks that are generated with CY intercept and transform them into a Pact file. So here in this package.json file, we can see we've added the package Pactflow Pact Cypress adapter. Some of the key points in this Cypress implementation are, like most things in Cypress, in your plugins index file, you will register your plugin. So in this plugin, we have set up our Pact Cypress plugin. We've registered our Pact provider. Here we're just, sorry, we can just ignore this bit for the moment because this isn't used, but we're registering our Pact Cypress plugin. In our support file, we will import that Pact Cypress adapter, and then we can begin to use that in our tests. So Cypress allows you the ability to intercept network requests that are made by the UI that you are testing, and you are able to provide mock or fixtured responses. So we can see some fixtures for our provider. So we have a products.json, which is an array of products, and we have our single product that's being returned. So in our tests, we can set up CY intercept. We can set up CY intercept traditionally as we would in Cypress, and we would set up our response body. The additional steps that we would use for setting up Cypress, for setting up Pact in this flow, is adding in this CY setup Pact, in which you would register your provider and consumer payer. You can also, at this point, exclude certain headers. So we will exclude Cypress generated headers by default, but there may be particular headers that you don't want to include in your Pact contract. And after the end of our test run, we will use Pact wait, which will take any of the aliased CY intercept requests and will transform them into a Pact contract. So hopefully in the time that I've been talking, our build of Cypress has completed. So in this build, again, we've gone through the same 3 steps. So we've gone through a test. In this test, we've ran sorry, my apologies. Yeah, sorry. So we've run Cypress here. We've then published these packs to the Pactflow platform. If we look back at our page here, we can see now that we have a consumer registered with our provider. We can see that we've had a successful verification between these two. We can choose to view that contract. And here we can see a contract comparison, which states that it's compatible between our provider and consumer. And we can see our consumer contract is visible. We can go through and we can see the individual details of each of those requests that were captured. And we have our provider contract, which is shown here. A couple of other cool things that we are able to do is we have some breaking change detection. I don't know if I'll be able to trigger a build off this. Hopefully I will. So on both Postman and Cypress side, we will have breaking change detection that is provided to us on branch builds. So if our particular mocks or our open API spec drift from either the consumer or provider contract, we will be prevented at deploy time because the Can I Deploy tool will register that we would be incompatible with that consumer or provider. So hopefully once we see these, so just to, whilst we're waiting for these, we'll just take a look at this pull request. So on the Postman side, our breaking change is we're changing the path from product/ID and we're changing it to product ID. So you can imagine how that change would break your client. On our Cypress side, we are adding in a additional field into our mock. So we're adding in the field foo here. One point to note, however, one of the great features about consumer-driven contract testing with Pact is our Pact contracts that we generate are tightly coupled with our client, our consumer client code, which means that when we encode our Pact, we will only encode our Pact with the actual fields that our consumer code cares about. So in our particular application on our product page, we only show the ID, name, and type. However, in our Pact that we are encoding, because it's based on the Cypress fixtures, the Cypress fixtures contain additional fields. So here the additional field is version, and version is not being used by our client code. So we have to be a little bit careful about the mocks that we generate on our client side if they're not being generated with the Pact framework. Just because the last thing you want to do is on your provider side cause a failure from their build because of your fixtures and not because of your actual code that you're trying to protect. However, some of the benefits of using this approach would allow you from the consumer side to leverage some of your existing tools. They would allow you to leverage your existing tools, but and potentially once you are able to provide the value of contract testing, potentially have those conversations with your developers to move those into a to move those tests kind of closer to the actual source code in a unit testing framework. So yeah, I've probably talked for quite a lot. We've got 20 minutes. So we can just see here that these two builds have failed. So here we can see that the computer says no when it asks to deploy this Postman provider, because it's not compatible with our Cypress consumer. Cool. So I'm going to stop sharing now, Matt, and I'll let you take over.
Thanks, Yusuf. It's worth saying as well that those the incompatibilities will be shown in the user interface as well. So you'll be able to see which part of the consumer spec that's out of sync, and also the actual Open API spec as well.
Yeah, I'll share that actually, because that's
okay. Yeah, if you got it. Yep.
We can see here that this has failed. We can look through and we can see that the contract comparison has failed. If we look at our consumer side, we can see that the path or method defined in the spec is not there. It's product. We are requesting the one that is actually there is product in our spec. So we can both see on the provider contract view, the provider contract is not compatible with the consumer. We get the same here, and then we get our nice kind of red icon really signifying that something's wrong. So that would, much like in our regular consumer-driven contract flow, be the point where we'd have some communication between teams.
Thanks, Yusuf.
Awesome.
I might share my screen now if I can. Let's go
yours.
to. So I'm just going to step forward a little bit. We'll share these slides afterwards as well. I think they're online. This is just the workflows that Yusuf was going through. So I'll quickly summarize some of these things, and then I'd love to spend the remaining 15 minutes or so answering any questions you guys have. It looks like we've got a bunch coming through, so thank you for that. So thanks, Yusuf. I guess to recap, what you just showed there was trying to show how, if you're already using Cypress and you've already got your test there, and if you're already using Postman, and in this case you're using the testing feature of Postman and Newman, how you can quickly turn that into a contract testing workflow with Pactflow, and hopefully you guys got a bit of a sense of that. So why and when would you use this feature? So I said before, when it's not about killing Pact. We still love Pact. We think it's amazing. We love it. But there's some use cases here that this is potentially more appropriate for, or more friendly to. So in terms of use cases, the obvious one is design first or API first workflows. Particularly in large enterprises, the feedback we got was the consumer-driven workflow is great, but it just didn't feel like it wasn't mapping onto the way they actually built software. So this is much more suited to those provider first or design first workflows where the provider does come first, and it's just a different process. So that's one use case. Second use case is retrofitting onto existing systems. Again, and this kind of goes to the question of, or the objection you might get when you've, work with your own teams. Why do I need to write these Pact tests? I've already got other tests. So in those cases where you do have really good coverage on both sides, potentially that's a valid objection. And so this is one use case, or this is a tool that we provide that enables you to take those existing tests and turn them into a contract testing solution. That might be the gateway drug to get you onto Pact, or you might find that this is powerful enough to actually solve your problem. The third use case here is legacy systems. So, those older systems, maybe circa 2000s, so need to run on big web application servers that you can't run Docker locally, or licensing or what have you prevents you from running it in a unit test like environment. But you have the ability to do black box or external testing here is another use case for maybe doing that. And the last one, which I can see a question is around, it can be more helpful when you're doing API gateways and also for third-party APIs. And we can get into some of the nuances of that. But the main reason is with API gateways, especially what they're mostly just doing pass-through, writing Pact tests for those situations can be quite cumbersome because the gateway doesn't really have any logic. So it just really needs to take all those tests and then act as a provider, but then really just rewrite those same tests to then be its consumer for downstream APIs. So this might be a nice way to help solve that problem. In terms of context, often what we say is if you can't do Pact or those code-based contract tests, this is a good sort of signal that this might be a way to help you. And when you can bring your own tools and extract more value, is those two contexts are a good starting point if you're looking at something like this. So before we get to questions, the last thing is just, okay, this sounded great. What do I do next? How do I get involved? If you head to our docs website, I think I saw a question there before. This feature is available for all of our plans. It's not just a free plan, not just our paid plans. All of our plans have this feature enabled, and including our starter free plan. If you head to docs.pactflow.io, you'll find plenty of documentation, tutorials, workshops, and all those example projects that Yusuf just showed you. That's a really great place to get started. We also have a Carter workshop that you can run in your browser, which might be a great thing to sort of do in your lunch break or something. It doesn't require you to download anything. You can just do it through your browser.